All right, howdy everyone. So I'm back with this tripod camera set up, and this is usually with the lousy audio, but again, I'll try to yell and hopefully you guys can hear me. So what I'm working on right now is all I'm trying to do is get the hinge that is going to be mounted to the door figured out, its placement on the door. So like I said, I don't want it jammed up against these corners because then the door may not open correctly, and I need to have it centered left to right. So here's my plan. For now, all I'm going to do is hold this up against the cowling and get it pretty much parallel to this edge here. And after I do that, after I have it up against the edge, I'm just going to make a mark down here at the bottom corner of the hinge. That's just going to be a reference mark. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure from this edge to that mark and then add an arbitrary number to it to move it down, to bring it away from this edge. So if I put my ruler here, I have the ruler up against the edge of the cowling, and that mark looks to be right at 7/8. So now I'm just going to back that up. I think I'll back that up to an even 1 inch. So I'll make a mark on the door at 1 inch. I'll take my ruler, I'll bring it down here to the other side, to this other side here, up against this edge, and I'll come down and make a 1 inch mark. Now again, I've got the door itself taped from underneath. I made sure that the door is positioned where I want it, and I've got it taped. So I can make my marks right on the door itself and know or be fairly confident that when everything is riveted together that the door will still be in its correct position and it won't be binding on this hinge. So now I've got my 2 marks. Again, I don't know how well this is going to come up in camera, on the camera, but again, I just take the hinge and I put it up against the cowling. Like I don't want it to physically be mounted in that position, but for reference, I put it up against that edge as best I can, and I get it kind of sort of square, and I make a mark. Now I know that I actually want it down from there, so I measure from the edge of the cowling with a ruler to that mark, and it happened to be about 7/8 of an inch. So I make a new mark at 1 inch, and I make it on this side of the door, and I make another one on this side of the door. So now that brings the hinge back away from this edge about 1/8 of an inch. At this point, all I need to do is take the ruler and connect those 2 lines. And I'll actually do that after I get the door taken off. I could do it now, but the ruler doesn't lay quite right because it's trying to rest on this cowling instead of laying flat against the door. But I do have my 2 reference marks. So now all I need to do is take the hinge. Actually, you know what? Let me go ahead and take this door off because I think I'm ready for that, right? I've got my reference marks. All I need to do is figure out how to lay the hinge. Actually, here's what I'm going to do. Since the door is already in place, I can put the hinge on those reference marks. I'm going to use the back half of the hinge now. This back half of the hinge is going to line up on these reference marks that I just drew. I can put that on there by hand. Be sure not to disturb the door itself, because remember, it's only taped. I can lay that on my marks, and I can just kind of eyeball it in this orientation. I can eyeball it centered on the door because the ends are close enough to the edges that I can get a pretty good, I can get it centered just by eyeballing it. So if I do that, all I need to do now is mark one of the holes through the hinge and onto the door itself. Okay, so again, I'm going to put the hinge on the door and line it up with my marks. I'm going to go ahead and try to draw a line between those to make it a little bit easier on me. Alright, so that's my line. My door looks like it's still in a good position. I'll put the hinge down on that line, and then I'll just eyeball it left to right, making sure that it will not hang up on the corners of the cowling when the door is open and closed. That looks good there. So I'm going to go ahead and mark a hole on this end, and I'll mark a hole on this end. Now at this point, what I should do is use a drill bit. Maybe I'll do that. Let me go get the proper size drill bit, and then I can actually get that hole perfect. If you use just a marker, it may not find the center of that hole. So I'll use a drill bit. Stand by. All right, let me try this again. So reference line on the door. Door looks like it's in a good position. Put the hinge on that line, center the hinge on the door left and right so that it will not hang up on the cowling when the door is open and closed. Something like this. And I'm going to hold that there. I'm going to make a mark with a drill bit through the hinge. There and there. One on each end, just like that. Okay, so now I got two indications on the hinge itself where I need to drill two holes. I'll take the door off. I'll very lightly center punch those two marks. I'll drill those two holes, and then I'll cleco the hinge to the door. And then I'll just go ahead and mark the other holes on the hinge, drill those, and then I'll be able to cleco the hinge and the spacers, the shims, to the door itself. Once that's located, I can go ahead and start working on the other hinge shaft that attaches to the cowling. So I'm going to take the door off and get these holes drilled, and we'll see how that works out. All right, howdy everyone. So now you can see that I've got the holes drilled through the hinge onto the door, and I also have my spacers, my shims, clecoed underneath the hinge. So just doing an easy dry fit, I went ahead and took this hinge, put it in place, slid a hinge pin in, just to get an idea if those shims underneath here are going to be at the correct height. And they seem like they will be. Now, initially I was thinking of going ahead and riveting this hinge to the door, but I'm not going to do that yet. If I were to rivet the hinge to the door and then get this hinge riveted to the cowling, if for whatever reason those spacers underneath weren't quite exactly the right thickness, then the door is not going to lay right, and I'd have to drill out these holes, or I'd have to drill out these rivets. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to leave this hinge clecoed to the door. I'm going to go ahead and lay out the holes for the hinge that mounts to the cowling. When I get that laid out, I'm going to rivet the cowling hinge in place first. Then I'll see how the door lays with the hinge pin in, and if I need to, I can adjust the spacers on the door side of the hinge. And then at that point, when I'm satisfied, I can rivet those. So for now, with this laid out like it is, I've obviously got my hinge pin in here. I've checked the alignment of the door. If you remember, on the inside of the door, I had traced the opening onto the inside. So now I can look at the door and I can see those lines that I had drawn, and I can just kind of position it a little bit. Remember, there's going to be a little bit of play in the knuckles, and this curved hinge piece is going to give you a little bit of adjustment. So I just use my lines as a guide. I have the door nicely set on the cowling. This hinge is clecoed with its spacers. Now all I need to do is locate this hinge here to the cowling. Before I do that, I'm going to kind of sort of do what I had done with this hinge. There are no holes in this hinge half at the moment. So first thing I'm going to do is pull this pin out. I'm going to take this hinge and I'm going to lay out where I want the holes. Then I'll bring it back, I'll pin it, I'll lay it on the cowl, and then I'll mark through the hinge onto the cowl where I want those holes. And then I'll drill those holes in the cowling, and then I can come back and cleco this hinge to the cowling, close the door, run the pin through to hold the door shut, and then see how it fits. And again, if I need to make an adjustment, I can do that with these shims. So again, let me pull this hinge half off and get some holes drilled into it.